up, War Rapport family? We are back with another great edition of Building Rapport. Today, I got a special guest for you guys. Joining me from Gatehouse Law in Birmingham, Alabama, is attorney Jace WIlliams to talk to us about a little NIL. Jace,
right.
Thanks for joining me, man.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to get this kicked off by talking about this subject from a different angle. Now, you're an attorney, and you're going to be uniquely set up to represent athletes. Can you talk a little bit about what your mission is going to be for student athletes in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a quick background on me. Like Mike said, my name is Jace WIlliams, Gatehouse Law. We mostly handle business transactions and things of that nature, but I am currently in the process of applying for a athlete's agent license here in Alabama. So that'll be processing here in the next couple months. Looking to protect some athletes on their NIL deals and possibly professional contracts in the future, whatever they need, making sure they're well taken care of.
Obviously, this is a growth market.
That's right.
Because
it's the Wild West.
Yeah, we don't know. Like, there's so much happening. Athletes athletes and institutions are scrambling to try to figure out a strategy as it pertains to NIL. As you're directing athletes, what is communication with the university like from a representation standpoint? And then, off camera, we kind of talked a little bit about the structure of how attorneys have to register as like a different entity in the state of Alabama. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, to represent an athlete in Alabama on an NIL deal, which is a relatively new thing here in the past couple of years, you actually have to register through Alabama Secretary of State office. They handle it all. They review it, make sure you're well qualified. And then each university kind of has their own rules that you have to deal with. So if I'm talking to Auburn one day, their rules might be different than Alabama or West Alabama or UAB, whoever it may be. So it's a narrow street that you got to walk down and make sure you're doing everything right. But as long as you're in compliance and taking care of the athlete at the end of the day, they're usually pretty cool with it. So just following all their different rules and regulations, that's the main thing to consider there.
There are definitely a lot of rules, and there are a lot of rules that nobody understands or even is aware of.
But they're changing every day. That's the other issue.
Well, speaking of change, and Alabama had an NIL law put into place that they repealed in February of this year.
That's right. So made it about 9 months, 10 months maybe before it got struck off the books. So
well, what I understand is the law was more restrictive than the actual policy that the NCAA was going to put in place. So I want to talk about that interim policy. The NCAA put in an interim policy for NIL that went into effect of July last year, like July 2021, right?
Yeah, that's right. Like July 1st last year, I think.
Okay, so what does that policy permit? What does it not permit?
Yeah, so the big thing is, that lets athletes and student athletes make basically money off their likeness. That's what name, image, likeness is, basically called the right to publicity. So they're able to be compensated off that, and it's a huge deal for athletes that in the past might have lost their eligibility for trying to do any kind of brand deals. These guys have millions of followers on social media. They have their own brand established before they, go pro or whatever they decide to do ultimately. And now, luckily, they're able to take advantage of that. So lets them do a bunch of different things, promote national recruiting, basically, retain it. It still retains all your prohibitions on pay for play, things of that nature. I know that's a big one that we'll get to in a minute here, is that, you still can't induce athletes to come to your university, but opportunities are out there.
It seems like that might be a really fine line when you talk about inducements. So
yeah,
there's a lot of gray around what is and isn't an inducement. Like coaches, so explain it. Coaches they're not disallowed from mentioning NIL during recruiting visits, but break it down for our listeners exactly what an inducement is.
Yeah, so an inducement is going to be anything that basically encourages we'll say a high school athlete in this case to come to your particular university. So, that's if a coach during recruiting is saying, hey, come to Auburn, Alabama, whatever it is, and we'll get you a big deal with whoever it may be. that's a big no-no. That's not allowed by the rules. So that's what the NCAA is going to strike down on. Now, like you said, there's a fine line. I mean, so I was taking a look at the Auburn rules today for their NIL policies, and all their corporate sponsors and their corporate partners are clearly listed there. You can see everybody they work with, from Chick-fil-A to Coca-Cola to Gatorade and Under Armour. So it's a fine line to walk, but I mean, it's out there as, who you could potentially benefit from, working with different universities.
So you mentioned something interesting. All their corporate sponsors are listed and they're public.
That's right.
So there may be nothing from stopping a coach or staff from saying, hey, as you know, Auburn University works with these sponsors, and in turn, they may want to work with our athletes. So you're permitted to hire representation, get in contact with these companies, and see what deals they might be open to. Would that be kind of walking the line?
Yeah, that's walking the line, but it's permitted. And the other thing is, like Auburn, for example, they actually have an NIL directory that companies can reach out to these athletes directly with NIL opportunities. So it's listed by sport, has a player's name, their Instagram handle, their Twitter handle, says, hey, reach out to them by direct message. And that's the best way to get in contact with them. And then from there, whether they're represented or not, you'll probably get directed to somebody else. And then, have to go through the compliance with a different university, or with the university. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting process that these companies are able to reach out directly to the athletes with different opportunities.
So that communication can flow both ways.
That's right.
Right. Athletes can reach out. Companies can now be proactively reach out, and there's an infrastructure there set up through the university for companies to reach out. Like if a company is reaching out to an athlete, like they're finding them on Auburn's website, or they're going through compliance. How's that working?
That's right. Yeah, you can go directly to Auburn's website and see. Let's see. Like if I want to get an example, we're just going to pick somebody completely random. We're going to go equestrian, top of the list. If I want to get in touch with Lily Beatty, I can find her on Instagram at lily.beatty or on Twitter at lily_beatty and direct message her with whatever opportunity I have. Maybe I want to give her an apparel deal, or, maybe I want her to do a speaking arrangement for me, whatever it may be.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. That angle of it doesn't get talked about enough.
No, not at all.
If you have a program that is a winning program and they've got enough exposure, companies may proactively reach out and say, hey, let's ride this train and get in contact with Lily and get on the equestrian train.
Hey, if Lily's watching that, have a wonderful night.
Our equestrian team came in second in the NCAA. They went to the equestrian national championship and came in second this year. They were the national runners up. So there may be some opportunities.
That's right. There may be.
Yeah. But in terms of, so we kind of have an idea of what's permitted and what's not permitted at this point. I've got the document you sent me in front of me, and one thing is clear: there is still a clear line that this cannot be pay for play.
That's right.
There can be no inducements, and there has to be a quid pro quo, right? Like there has to be money given and services provided.
Correct.
Now, are there any restrictions on what kind of services can be provided?
Do you mean like what kind of businesses or what kind of services the athlete can provide?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything from signing autographs to maybe appearances. Are you precluded from doing I guess business with any type of business?
Yeah, it's pretty wide open. So you can do, TV commercials, Instagram ads, in-person appearances, apparel deals, whatever it is really. But it really depends on a state-by-state basis. So I know, or even a school-by-school basis at this point, since Alabama repealed their law, that was kind of part of it. But for example, like tobacco products, gambling, alcoholic beverages, basically anything we'll call vices, you're kind of not allowed to work with, at least according to Auburn's policy. So those are some things that the university is going to look down on when they get, submitted as a NIL opportunity.
Okay. So wait, Now we're talking about underage athletes here, so maybe
That's right.
alcohol may be frowned upon a little.
Yeah, alcohol is not a good one for them to endorse.
Okay,
Gambling, tobacco, I think it's 18 on that, maybe 19 here in Alabama.
I
But
see.
yeah, any of those things that these guys, young kids are looking up to them and things of that. You don't want them promoting to go out to the gas station and grab a beer from the cooler when you're.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's honestly it's a good thing. So, and then universities can also, they can basically block deals that conflict with their other sponsors or contractual partners of the university.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, that is another consideration that all this. Uh, we'll back it up a little bit. When an athlete gets an NIL deal, it has to be submitted and approved by the university,
Okay.
and so their compliance team is going to look at that, and if there is something that conflicts with their contractual obligations, obviously they're not going to let the athlete pursue that deal.
That's very interesting. That is, I think that's important for our listeners to note. So we've talked about what it is. This policy by the NCAA went into effect as of July 1st of last year.
That's right.
On February 1st, Alabama repealed their overly restrictive NIL law, and they are now abiding by essentially three things we talked about before we came on camera tonight, which is the NCAA interim policy, right? The university's policy on NIL. So this could be different from university to university. Like some universities may have stricter policies on
That's
NIL.
right. A lot of them are the same right now, is what I've noticed. Just because everyone's still learning, like you said, it's still relatively new, so they're bouncing ideas off each other. They're trying to make it as clear as possible, and also I think that'll be one of these things that gets tightened up here in the next couple of years because you don't want any kind of unfair competition, things like that. That's going to start playing on that inducements that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So,
Well, and then lastly, it's this kind of they got rules in place for special NIL agents that you have to register with the state as an agent of NIL, and
that's right.
right, and that's different from being like a professional sports agent.
Yeah, so it's actually they're both part of the same application. It's kind of a check the box thing these days. I think they changed that in the last session. Some of the things I saw were some people's applications were basically withheld because they didn't select one of the two options or both. But yeah, that just they want to make sure that whoever is providing these professional services to these athletes is giving them the disclosures and warnings that they need to look out for. They're notifying the institutions of that relationship, and it carries some pretty serious penalties if you're not registered or not doing those things right. I think it's let's see, $50,000 charge and felony charges.
Oh wow!
I'll tell you, I'm not interested in that. So
That's surely
as much as I want to
not.
help somebody out, I'm not going to jail for anybody. So
Well, you know what? While we're on the subject of what's prohibited, right? We know that any agreement without a quid pro quo is not permitted, right? And it can't be contingent upon enrollment at your school, right? And there can be no guarantee of athletic participation,
right.
uh,
So yeah, basically you can't condition a deal on any athletic performance, them going to the school or anything like that. It just has to be, at basically you're backing it up to their brand as an individual.
Got it.
And
Okay, so in the NFL, I remember seeing a video of Gronk needing like one more catch to get some bonus or something
that's
like
right.
an NIL company cannot put in their contract. We'll pay you X amount if you score 10 touchdowns this
Yeah,
year.
that's correct. No,
Right.
no bonus clauses in NIL deals.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And then lastly, the institutions cannot provide any of this money. This strictly has to come from these completely separate businesses.
That's right. It's coming from third parties. It's not coming from the university. Now, that doesn't mean that boosters of the program cannot, provide compensation for these NIL deals. But it's kind of like we said earlier. It's all got to run in accordance with, these different compliance issues that are out there, and can't go on the big two things: pay for play and inducement. As long as it doesn't violate those, you're probably going to be okay.
What about international students, Jace? I've heard there are some complications there, maybe for international students trying to take advantage of NIL.
Yeah, so there are, and I'll back it up. I'm not a international law guy. I dabble in it a little bit, but I know enough to be dangerous. So this is kind of one of the things the NCAA, it looks like they kind of threw their hands up at and said, hey, you're allowed to benefit from this NIL policy, but depending on your visa status, things of that nature, you basically need to consult with your school and other professionals to make sure you're not in violation of any of those issues.
Any federal laws?
Yeah, or any international visas, anything like that. That's going to become an issue for them.
We talked about a number of things tonight. I just want to close getting your thoughts on where this is going. Now, you've done a lot of research, and there's still a lot left to be seen. But it's been my feeling that the rules will continue to evolve the more information they get on how these deals are going down. A lot of people are calling it the Wild Wild West. What is your feeling on where we're going with NIL?
Yeah, so it's in a really interesting place right now. There's a big Supreme Court case last year that basically said, there can be no cap on NIL compensation. Don't know if that'll be challenged again, if there will be any kind of restrictions on that. I mean, one of the interesting things I read today is right now there's basically a $8 million potential NIL deal that's hanging out there. Hasn't been announced who it is, what university it's with, what the company is, but what I've read is it's a class of 2023 5-star football recruit, and they're talking about $350K immediately, plus up to $2 million a year while they're on campus. I mean, these deals are getting huge, and I think eventually you're going to see the NCAA or the states step in to kind of just play on that and make sure that different universities aren't getting an unfair advantage. I think,
right.
We're in the South, man. I'm in Birmingham. I'm originally from Georgia. I know how SEC football is. It reigns supreme, and so obviously you're going to have a better opportunity if you're a 5-star football player to make some money while you're in college than if you went up north or somewhere like that. Not to say that there's not great schools there as well, but it's just kind of the ecosystem of what you're dealing with down here.
Well, let me ask you this. So, again, Alabama repealed their law because the NCAA policy was less restrictive, and they didn't want to create a competitive disadvantage with other schools within the SEC. But what is your feeling about? Is that the take that Alabama is just going to take on this? Will we see a new Alabama law at some point?
I don't know that you will, because that was basically the point of repealing it is, Alabama put it into place so they had something on the books, and then the new restrictions came out and they basically said, we don't want to be at a disadvantage to other states.
Right.
And so I'm not sure that you will see something on the books unless, it becomes a major issue. But like we said, it's ever evolving. It could change next week, next year, and we'll see. Hopefully, maybe Georgia will win another championship, and then they'll finally decide to strike it down.
Yeah, hopefully not. But listen, Jace, I appreciate you taking some time to come on and talk to our listeners about everything NIL, especially from a legal perspective. Guys, I want to thank my favorite lawyer, Jace WIlliams, for joining the War Report today.
Thanks,
to talk
man.
NIL. Guys, if you want more content like this, hit like and subscribe. We are the War Report on most social media platforms. TW Rapport on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.